Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's two words to start with, please. Pleasure and pride. Pleasure for me to be here today with you. It's such a high-quality conference. The conference centre itself, the event last night, and the quality of the delegates as well as the speakers really is up there with any of the best conferences that I've had the pleasure to attend. So that's the first word. Pride. I'm very proud to be representing Alexander Mann Solutions here today. We're a talent management and acquisition company, UK headquartered, privately owned. But the reason why I'm here representing AMS in Poland is because thanks to colleagues past and present, over 25% of our global workforce are based here in Krakow. And as we plan for the next 5-10 years, we will continue to grow our capability in this wonderful marketplace. Now, let me take you through some key messages, if I can. I've been in the outsourcing industry now for close on 25 years. I first started in outsourcing in the early 90s. I've seen many trends. I've seen many things delivered. I've seen many changes. And when I was asked to speak today by Adam and Andrew, and could I share some trends with you in my 20-minute slot, the challenge was, how do you condense all of the trends that are taking place today in 20 minutes? So I've focused on three, if I may. And the three trends that I see that are really, really important for us are the supply and management of talent, that most valuable of resource. Marcin mentioned that we're in a people business. It's fundamental to all of our success. So I want to share some interesting trends with you that I've managed to research in support of this presentation. The second key area I want to touch upon is globalization and the increase in globalization, and again with a view to what that might mean over the next 10 years or so. And then finally, I will very briefly touch upon, conscious of time, Adam, the automation, the rise of the machines, and knowing that the next session will actually cover robotics in more detail. So I'll touch upon that, but I do believe these are the three most important trends that we should take into consideration. If I look back over my 20 years in outsourcing industry and the 20 years that Alexander Mann Solutions have been in the recruitment process outsourcing industry, I think there are three key things that should give us a lot of confidence as we look forward to the future. And the first one is that we've come a long, long way since outsourcing or business process management, as it was called in the early 90s, and then subsequently changed to business process. I think outsourcing has developed over those years. And I think one of the key factors there is the ability for outsourced service providers to continuously move up the value chain. No longer a case of processing an invoice, but actually a case of getting in there and helping those clients with the business intelligence and the data analytics and the predictive analytics to understand how we might manage our resources, whether they be financial, whether they be human, much, much more effectively. And I think the most impressive trend in the outsourcing industry that I'm certainly very proud of is that we continuously show an ability to thrive, to develop, to adapt, and of course to prosper. And those will be key important factors as we look forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So let me give you the three trends. I've mentioned them before. The supply and management of talent is really key, globalization, and finally the rise of the machine. And let us take you through each of these in a little bit more detail. The first one in terms of supply and management of talent. Now, I'm going to be stating the obvious here, and you might be thinking, my gosh, does this guy know what he's talking about? Because it is so obvious. The first trend is this: the continuous supply of talent cannot be taken for granted, particularly for those of us in Europe, whether we be in Western Europe or Central Europe. The supply of talent cannot be taken for granted, and we cannot ignore the economic trends that are there for all to see. And the second key lesson is that we all need to think creatively on how we attract, develop, and retain that talent. So those are the two key messages to start with in this particular area. And I'm going to start with a graph that I managed to get from a paper written by Oxford Economics. It's probably my most complex slide, so if you bear with me, I'll take you through what this model is trying to articulate. This model is predicting either the surplus or deficit of talent based on future demand. It was written a few years ago, so it was written 2 years ago, and it's predicting what that surplus or demand will show in 2021, which is only 6 years away from now. And when I came across this, I found it very, very interesting indeed. The reason why I found it interesting is here I am today standing in front of you in Poland, and that study, if that study is to be believed, and it's based on research, interviewing some, I think, 400 HR executives all over the world, as well as looking at economic trend data and analysis, that would indicate that from a Poland perspective, in 2021, there could be a slight deficit of talent. In other words, the demand will outstrip the supply here in Poland. So that's a key point to consider. If you look at some of the other markets, the US and the UK are slightly better off than what's predicted for Poland at 0.8, minus 0.8 deficit. If we look at France and Germany, minus 0.6. So that was a striking statistic when I came across that. And of course, I think everyone in the audience would understand this one, but if you look at the surplus of talent, India at 2.1% surplus stands out there as the most outstanding. So when I then looked at this a little bit further, just one statistic jumped out to me, and that was that India over the next 6-7 years are predicted to have 46 million graduates, in addition to where they've come from over the past 10-15 years in the outsourcing industry. So some key food for thought with regards to that talent. And for all of you, whether you're an HR professional, an operations manager, but all of us are involved in managing people, and all of us must be thinking now, what are we doing to ensure that we are strategically workforce planning and to ensure that we're taking these thoughts, these statistics into consideration when we're making our plans for the next 5 to 10 years. But there's another aspect, and this is something I find most interesting, and this is a piece of paper that we've used recently in my company as we start to prompt conversations with HR directors, and it's the management of the talent. And as I look around the room today, I would probably hazard a guess and say that most people in this room are in the Xers, Generation X. There may be some of us, very few of us I would imagine, who are boomers, who were born in the 60s. But the upcoming workforce are what we call the millennials. And it's interesting because in the organization that I represent, Alexander Mann Solution, about 70%, 80% of our people actually fall within the millennial category. Most of our managers in the organization fall within the Xers category. And that's important because we've got to understand what is important to the workforce. Because what was important to me is to a certain extent irrelevant when we start to talk to our apprentices or our graduates today on what's important to them. What motivates them from a career perspective? How many of them want to stay with the same company over the next 5 years, 10 years, so on and so forth? Now, it is interesting because this is research that was conducted externally, but every time I get the opportunity to meet with our graduates or our apprentices, I ask them the question, do you conform to what's stated here? And it's very interesting because most of the young people, whether those young people are between the ages of 18 and 25, would actually split themselves between the millennials and the Xers, almost 50-50. But they're certainly different from the baby boomers amongst us. So the key message here, and this is something that we picked up from the US Department of Employment, but a really, really interesting statistic, 60% of all new jobs in the 21st century will require skills possessed by only 20% of the workforce today. And this is a cartoon that Yola Gankowska sent me, so hopefully this will come across. It translated well for me. But look at this, the difference in generations. The old grand there, the newspaper says they may stop delivering letters on Saturday. The father says, "What's a letter?" and the child says, "What's a newspaper?" And hopefully you can relate to that too. And it's important for us as employers that we take that generational gap into consideration when we're looking to hire, train, develop, and build the infrastructure for our people to flourish. And the key point there is that already, and I'm sure most of you are, but attraction, development, and retention plans must take into consideration the needs of all of our workforce and not the few. So globalization, this is a stated obvious fact. The world is getting smaller in outsourcing terms. So all I'm just going to touch upon with you here is to prompt some thoughts that you may have by sharing some quotes with you and some key facts. So the World Bank, 85% of the world's population can be found in emerging markets, and they can contribute almost 3/4 of global GDP growth. By 2030, the global middle classes will more than double in size, from 2 billion to 4.9 billion, most in emerging economies. But here's the really interesting fact. The European and American middle classes will shrink from 50% of the total to just 22%. And if we start thinking, and this follows Martin's presentation about where we need to start thinking differently, particularly so as we start thinking shared services, outsourcing services, globalization, just take into consideration this, the growth of technology over the past 15, 20 years. The workplace of today, not necessarily the future, is about a connected, enabled, empowered knowledge worker, less bound by that desktop computer and that fixed line telephone. But how many of our centres still operate with the standard PC and the standard fixed telephone? And we have to start embracing that technology if we're looking to, again, attract and retain the talent of the future. Gone are the days when employees wielded a simple set of tools to get the work done. Almost in today's world, it is a case of anytime, anywhere work. And the employees will use whatever tools we give them to be as effective and as productive as possible. And again, the days of the 9 to 5, the 9 to half 5, or let's be radical, the 8 to 6, are beyond us as well. Because we are connected in that 24/7 world. And finally, just touching upon the rise of the machine that we see here. This was a study done by Deloitte and University of Oxford. Robots to replace 1/3 of the UK workforce by 2025. So I'm very interested to hear the next presentation. Jobs paying under £30,000 sterling a year are nearly 5 times as likely to be replaced as £100,000 roles. Another interesting statistic and a key fact when I really gave this some thought and said, is that true? Can that be true? And then I really thought about the automotive industry in not only the UK but all over the world. And if you look at how robots have replaced workers, but not only replaced workers, but they've made those companies much, much more productive at the same time. And consequently, those organizations such as Jaguar Land Rover or Nissan in the UK are now more successful than they've ever been, employing more people than they've ever employed. And 47% of jobs today could be automated in the next 2 decades. So how susceptible are we to computerization? So those are the key points there. And then I wanted to finish and close by just prompting some thoughts in your minds, as I did when I brought this presentation to a conclusion at the weekend. And I thought, is the rise of the machine a threat or an opportunity to us in the outsourcing industry? And what I believe is that automation and robotics alone could be absolutely a threat. And that's my personal opinion. But if we take automation and robotics and we start thinking strategically and combine it with that projected talent shortfall, that deficit that's facing us in Western and Central Europe, plus the continued challenges of globalization, and I honestly believe that they can be seen as an opportunity and not a threat. And my final point, and this goes to the success of the conference, because the question we were asked the speakers was, how far can we go? And what I honestly believe, when you stop and you think and you plan, that with that strategic workforce planning, coupled with employee engagement that appeals to all levels of our employees, all ages, coupled with talent management, that together we can all go further in the outsourced industry as we look forward to the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.